So maybe you've been trying to take down a new real estate project, right? Maybe you found a great deal or you see a great deal online, whether it's a flip, a rental, whatever it is, and you don't necessarily have all the resources yourself to put the deal together. So you may be thinking, well, how do I create a joint venture, right? How do I bring in other people who can basically partner with me and help me bring the right pieces so we can do the deal together? And that's a great line of thought because that's literally how I've grown my real estate portfolio. So what I thought I would do is create this video to break down the four key components of what actually goes into a joint venture, right? Like, what are the four things you actually need to happen in order to create a joint venture to close on a real estate transaction? And then I'll also give you guys an overview of who typically brings what to the table, what to expect, right? What does each person get for bringing this component to the table? That way, if you're kind of trying to put this together, or if you've thought about maybe partnering with one other person, you guys can figure out the appropriate splits, exactly how to split everything, and how to actually put this thing together. But first, before I get into that, my name's Lior, and I'm a real estate investor out of Boston. And as I said, I've grown out my investment portfolio literally using this strategy of essentially joint venturing with other folks, right? Because real estate is a team sport. So if you're really gonna grow to something big, you do need to know how to work with people and how to put everything together. Before I get into the content, guys, though, if this is your first time to the channel, make sure you smash that subscribe button. It'll help me a ton with putting out more content for you guys so that more of you guys can understand how to grow your portfolios and how to actually build wealth. So let's jump right into it. And I'm gonna start by talking about what are the actual four main things that go into a real estate transaction, right? What are the four things you or your partners need to bring to the table? Well, number one, there's actually finding the deal, right? The deal is usually king, right? So if you find an off-market deal, or maybe you even find an on-market deal, right? Someone's got to go out, find the deal that makes sense for you, your team, whoever, to go out and buy. Number two thing you're gonna need to do is actual project execution, right? So what I mean by that, if it's gonna be a flip, right, something you're gonna go renovate and sell, who's actually gonna be managing the contractors or the general contractor? If it's gonna be a buy and hold, right, let's say a rental property, who's gonna be doing the day-to-day operations? Even if you're gonna be hiring a property management company, who's gonna be managing the manager? Who's going to be looking after the books? Who's going to be coordinating between you and the accountants, you and the lawyers if something happens, right? You basically need to know who's actually going to be the execution person. Then component 3 and component 4 are pretty interrelated. It is basically who's going to bring in the debt to the deal, right? And who's going to bring in the equity to the deal. And here's what I mean by that, right? Unless you're buying a property cash, you need to go get a mortgage, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. So you need to know who's actually going to bring the mortgage, right? Who's going to apply for the mortgage, whether it be a residential mortgage or a commercial mortgage, who's actually going to sign their name on the dotted line, and then who's going to bring in the equity, right? So essentially the down payment, right? So it could be a 20% down, 25% down, but someone needs to stroke that check in order to get into the deal. Now, in terms of how typical deals are structured, I can just tell you from my experience the way I've done it and the way that's worked for me. So typically what I will do along with my partner is we will bring in 3 of the 4 things. We will typically bring in the deal, we will typically bring in project execution, and we will typically bring in the debt, right? Because we are the on the ground folks, right? So not only do we have great deal hunters working with us, as well as a great network of brokers and wholesalers, right? So we typically have really great access to deals, but we're also the folks responsible for actually getting things done on the ground once we close, right? In terms of renovations, property management, tenant management, any legal, accounting, all of that stuff that I mentioned before, that solely falls on our shoulders. And then of course the debt, right? So we are typically the ones that are bringing in the debt. So we typically finance our transactions through commercial mortgages, right? So we typically go with local community banks that have commercial mortgages. And it's either me or my partner that will typically sign on the loan, essentially guaranteeing that loan to the bank and bringing that into the table. Now, the fourth thing, the equity, is typically what we go out and search for, right? So we typically look for silent equity partners that come in and are just essentially funding the deal by providing that 20 or 25% down payment so that we can put that in and close on the property. Now, before I jump into like how do we compensate these folks that are bringing in this, large sums of cash, let me say there are exceptions to these rules as well, right? So, I said that there are the 4 components that you need to bring to the table. You can certainly have exceptions where different folks bring different components of those pieces to the table. So, for example, let's say you don't necessarily have the deal, but maybe you know a broker or a wholesaler or something like that that has the deal, but maybe instead of getting paid a commission check or some sort of wholesale fee, they actually want a percentage of the deal. So we've actually structured where the wholesaler comes in as part of the entity, right? And instead of taking a fee, we'll essentially take a percentage of the project for finding the deal. And for larger projects, right, typically not the smaller stuff, but when we go into the $2-3 million projects and above, in terms of bringing on debt, that also can become a little complicated because in the commercial world, just to give you guys a quick high-level view of it, typically, in order to get a commercial mortgage, you need to have a net worth that's equivalent to the mortgage you're applying for, right? So, for example, if you're looking for $1 million loan for a commercial mortgage from a local community bank, typically they will ask for you to have $1 million net worth, right? And as you get into larger and larger projects, right? Let's say we're going to go take a look at a $5 or $10 million project. I don't think, between me and my partner, we may not necessarily have that balance sheet of $5-10 million quite yet, right? So what we might do is actually go out and partner with someone who just has the balance sheet to sign on the loan. Now, this is a very complicated topic in terms of compensation, risks, and all that. There's other material on there, but I just thought I would, spill out that exception that you can certainly have another individual who's going to come onto your team to bring on the loan for the project. Now, in terms of compensation, let's say you are going to be doing those 3 things, kind of like I typically do: the project execution, the deal finding, and bringing in the debt. And you're going to look for someone to bring in the equity, right? Because you don't have that 20-25% down payment. So you're going to go partner with maybe your rich uncle, maybe someone in your network that is a working professional, has cash, but just doesn't have time to go and execute on projects, right? So you're going to say, hey, why don't you bring this money and we can essentially partner on the deal together. And if it's going to be something like a rental, the way it typically works is you're probably going to split the cash flow that comes off the building, right? So, for easy numbers, let's say you split the building 50-50 with that partner, and let's say that building generates $2,000 of cash flow a month. You might say, you know what, you take $1,000 and I take $1,000, right? So that's just a very simplified way of doing it. You can obviously get a lot more complex with with something called preferred returns, waterfall structures and everything, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Now that you have a sense of, how you can actually structure these deals and what are the components, one note I'll put out there, especially if you're going to go out and partner with someone that's going to bring in the equity, for example, right, that 20 to 25% down payment, you want to be pretty upfront about the limitations of the equity investor. And what I mean by that is you are going to be the operator for a reason, right? You're the guy or gal that's going to be on the ground, that found the deal, that's going to actually execute on the project. So that private investor, right, they don't need to worry about actual day-to-day operations, right? So that's kind of the value you bring to the table. So, for example, if a private investor says, well, why don't I just go do this deal by myself? Why would I split it 50-50 with you, right? Especially if it's something involving renovations or tenant turnaround or anything like that, right? You are going to be the one that's actually performing the work. So that's kind of your value to the equity investor. You can explain to them that you're going to be doing all the groundwork. They can continue doing whatever it is they're doing to generate that cash, right? If it's a working professional, they can focus on their jobs. They don't need to deal with the BS on the ground, right? So that's kind of the attractive part for the investor, and that's kind of the attractive part for you. So at a high level, that's kind of how you structure real estate joint ventures with other folks. If you remember those 4 components I talked about, then you can figure out, who's bringing what to the table and figure out fair and decisive splits based on that. It's a great model to work up. As I said, that's literally the basis of how I was able to grow up my real estate portfolio, by being able to bring certain things to the table and then partnering with other folks that might have had the equity to invest when I didn't necessarily. So I know it's a complicated topic, but if you guys have any questions, any comments, just shoot them below and I will help you out.